We would like to begin our event by first acknowledging the nations whose traditional lands we currently occupy and organize upon, the Anoka, Illinois, who include the Kaskaskia, Peoria, Kikapoa, and Miami-Yaki. Our group, our RSO, was created this past January by myself and a group of other U of I students who are members of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The PSL is a revolutionary socialist party with branches all over the country. We've been organizing here in Champaign-Urbana since November 2017. I am a member of the steering committee. The PSL believes that socialism, the collective ownership of society's wealth, and rational economic planning is the solution to the environmental crisis, endless war, racism, and all the evils of capitalism and class society. We believe that in order to achieve socialism, a society of equality and plenty, we must have a revolution. The old order of competition, alienation, and oppression must be replaced by a new world of cooperation, sharing, and real equality. We have branches all over the United States and friends all over the world. We're building a party of revolutionaries to help make the people's dreams of peace and prosperity a reality. We hope you join us either as a member or as a friend in the struggle. I just want to talk about... I just want to talk before we begin the event with other upcoming events that the PSL and Students for Socialism and Liberation are doing. So first, there's an event that is being put on that we are co-sponsoring with the Students Against Sexual Assault. Title IX, if you're not familiar, is an act that outlines how colleges and universities should deal with sexual assault and gender-based discrimination. The Trump administration has recently made big changes to Title IX. They redefined the meaning of gender to assign sex at birth rather than gender identity, which prevents trans students who experience transphobia from reporting it as an act of discrimination or even a hate crime. Additionally, the new changes proposed regarding how campuses should deal with sexual assault will place survivors at a severe disadvantage. They will not only have to face their perpetrator in court, but also in the classroom without being notified. Students Against Sexual Assault and other organizations are going to hold a rally on the Quad, April 13th, that's a Saturday, and it's at 1 p.m. to demand that the university not only retain the policies from before the Trump administration, but to make additional progressive changes to further support survivors of sexual assault and transgender students. There's another organization in town, it's actually a national organization called Insulin for All. The price of insulin has increased over 1,000% since 1996. One vial of insulin is currently $280, and people need 2 to 4 vials of insulin if they are diabetic. Claire Irwin is the leader of the Champaign-Urbana chapter of Insulin for All, and Students for Socialism and Liberation are hosting her in a room to be determined on campus on April 17th, where she's going to be talking about the struggle for insulin within the context of the greater overall struggle for health care. Illinois Coalition Assisting Undocumented Students Education is dedicating the month of April to events that raise awareness for immigrants and undocumented students. There's a gala being held this month at the end of the month with includes a fundraiser for a scholarship at the U of I for undocumented students. And there's a number of events that lead up to that gala, of which PSL is proud to co-sponsor. On April 11th, there's student ally training. April 18th, there will be a panel, and April 25th, there will be a movie night. And I believe the gala is on April 29th. So that is also happening. And one last announcement is we are also involved with the Champaign County Bailout Coalition. Champaign County Bailout Coalition believes that cash bail is an unfair, unjust, and classist implementation. People should not be behind bars unless they've been convicted, and it forces working class and poor people to stay behind bars, not be able to take care of their families. And to get to that point, we're trying to kick off with a bailout fund here, a bailout event here in Champaign. It should be at the end of this month, and then early May is where they're shooting for an actual bailout. So please, for any of these events, you should put your email down, sign up for PSL, check our Facebook, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Champaign-Urbana. If you're interested in the Bailout Coalition project, just come speak to me after the event. That being said, for our main event, our speaker, I'm excited to announce Gloria Riva. Gloria is a labor, community, anti-war activist based in San Francisco, California. She was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Gloria attended Brandeis University, where she was active in affirmative action struggles. Gloria has been a key organizer of many mass demonstrations and other actions opposing wars and occupation in Central America, Iraq, Palestine, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere. Gloria has worked for decades to defend Cuba's sovereignty and against the U.S. blockade. She is a regular contributor to Liberation News. She was awarded Cuba's Friendship Medal in 2010, approved by the Council of State for her many years of Cuba solidarity, and is the national coordinator of the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five and the Cuba-Venezuela Solidarity Committee. With that, please welcome Gloria.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I was born and raised in the United States, and I believe, as many of the people I work with, many thousands of people in the U.S. and many more, especially those who marched in Washington, D.C. on March 16th, that being from the United States, or whether we're immigrant, or whether we're people who live in other parts of the world, we have every right to oppose U.S. government intervention, aggression against Venezuela, and any other country. And we don't have to be from Venezuela to have that opinion. And you know, anybody can find an opinion to back up their argument. Anybody can. But the question in Venezuela is one that goes way beyond the border of that country. It has to do with the United States government thinking that they can dominate Latin America and the Caribbean once more, as they did, as they have in the past. And when we look at the U.S. policy, even going back a short time, after World War II, when the Organization of American States was founded in 1947 in order to control the politics of the region, to make sure that the U.S. had a handle on what was taking place there, something that now they can't seem to get the OAS to do their will against Venezuela, so they created a new group called the Group of Lima, and we can talk about that later. But the history of the U.S. has meant, in Latin America, the death of literally hundreds of thousands of people. And so we have an obligation to prevent another war, more death, more massacres, and more repression in the country of Venezuela. And as John Bolton said last November when he was named as the National Security Advisor to the Trump administration, he said, he called it the troika of tyranny. And by that he meant Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. And so they're not going to finish if they were to succeed with Venezuela. That's why I'm on a national tour along with Marisa Sanchez. We've been driving, taking Greyhound buses, driving across the country, and we're going to reach more than 30 cities, and that's just a start, because we feel it's our duty to talk about what I saw there and what many other journalists have seen, having traveled there, and to counter the U.S. media lies, which is the most ferocious, hysterical campaign that I have seen in a great long time, in demonizing not just President Nicolás Maduro, but demonizing the whole Bolivarian project, and before that, Hugo Chavez, and making the people of Venezuela invisible, so that the U.S. media can play the role of paralyzing much of the population, which normally would say no U.S. war, and instead is being told it's so horrific that you have to support U.S. intervention. So I just want to start by saying that, and to make it clear where I and our party stand. I've been to Venezuela 12 times. I don't claim to know everything about a country if I'm not from there, but I've really seen a lot in those 12 years. I mean, in those 12 times. I went there the first time in 2001. Hugo Chavez had been president for 2 years, and it was still very early in his first administration. He was facing a National Assembly that was hostile to him. He couldn't really get any legislature going in a big way. But they did have, in his very first year as president, a new constitution. It was the first constitution in all of Venezuela's history in which the people, through a constituent assembly, something we have no clue what that is in the United States because we have this stone-hard constitution that was written by slave owners and has remained ever since. Well, some changes with the Bill of Rights, but even that's been eroded. Well, anyway, the Constituent Assembly, people who were elected, drafted a new constitution, one that said everything in the soil, the minerals, the water resources, and the oil, the wealth of Venezuela belongs to Venezuela, not to be privatized. The right to housing, the right to education, the right to peace, the right to equality, the right of the indigenous people to equality and social justice for all the people. That's the 1999 Constitution. But yet it was very hard in the early years. I remember one of the first acts that Hugo Chavez did was to declare that lunch would be free in the schools. And as a result, more than 250,000 children who were not attending school began to go to school because there was food. I was there in the early years when, because there was so much poverty, the poverty was so great, something that the wealthy class didn't really care about and felt that, well, they're poor because, oh, they're lazy, or like the rich people here, how they think of poor and working class people. There was so much poverty in the country that people didn't have food, and so Chavez began a whole food program of delivering food to kitchens when women volunteered, and they would provide food just because people needed it. All these things that were taking place in the beginning. And then came the coup. The coup that was engineered in Washington, April 11 to 13, 2002. And if it had succeeded, it would have ushered in fascism. Because the repression was there. The repression was prepared. And luckily, the people came out en masse. The supporters of Chavez came out and gave backing to the loyal soldiers and army to Chavez, and the coup was ended. It was an unprecedented event. For those of us who were watching, very, very worried about what was taking place, it was the most stunning thing to see the people bring Chavez back to office. And that started a new stage in the Bolivarian Revolution. Of course, to make it a quicker relating of what has taken place in these years, in 2004, I was present there when Chavez called together hundreds of international intellectuals, artists, and human rights individuals, where he declared that the aim and the objective of the revolution was socialism. Socialism, and it was very exciting to hear. He announced the formation of a new party, and that party now has more than 6 million members. I have seen their activism. I'm very impressed by that organization. It's a mass organization, but one with a high degree of discipline among its members and enthusiasm for defending the project. I want to mention, of course, another attack on the Chavez government, and that was the oil sabotage. For many people who don't know, the attacks against Chavez did not end. They only intensified. And for 5 months, the oil industry was frozen. There was sabotage by a Texas corporation that had the ability to help shut down the oil industry along with traitorous elements inside the oil industry. And for 5 months, the oil didn't produce. And very, very fortunately, they came out of that crisis with patriotic workers, with people from abroad, and all those who came and restored the oil industry. So that's part of what has taken place against the Bolivarian Revolution. And very sadly, very tragically, Hugo Chavez died on March 5th, 2013. But you know what's really interesting, and I was talking with people earlier today, the thing that distinguishes Venezuela in the recent years from the other countries such as Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Ecuador is that where in those countries either progressive or left-leaning governments had been elected, which had over the last 10 years greatly improved the conditions of their population. For example, Rafael Correa in Ecuador began to use much of the resources, again oil and other resources, for the population. Poverty was reduced considerably. And he canceled much of the foreign debt. Because as we know about debt to the banks, whether here or abroad, people can pay out of their pocket. And the debt grows, and the interest grows, and the debt never is paid, because it's never payable. But that's what Correa did. In Bolivia, Evo Morales was elected, and a new constitution, a new culture. It's called the Plurinational Republic of Bolivia, meaning recognition of all the indigenous peoples who live in Bolivia, because it's majority indigenous. People who were always scorned, disdained, suffered great poverty and repression. That was Bolivia. Argentina, first the Kirchner and then the Fernandez governments, again, were able to rescue Argentina from what had been in what I consider the two decades that were lost, the 80s and the 90s, when Argentina basically sold off all of its national wealth to banks, to foreign corporations, and it was left with almost nothing to claim for its own. And I was in Argentina in 2005, in November, when Hugo Chavez came for the People's Summit of the Americas in Mar del Plata, Argentina. Why was that important? Because what was taking place at the same time in Mar del Plata was the Summit of the Americas. This is the U.S.-dominated, U.S.-directed summit that is carried out, different years at a time, the Summit of the Americas. But that one was important because George Bush was hoping to push a Latin America-wide, a continent-wide free trade agreement to further take more control of the resources of the continent. And it was called the FTAA. But Chavez came along with radical, revolutionaries, progressive people, the indigenous peoples, people from all Latin America came to Mar del Plata, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, to hear Chavez say, we're here to bury Alca, FTAA in Spanish. He says, we're here to bury Alca. And no more debt to the banks, no more selling off our wealth. We want to share our resources. And that's where he declared Petrocaribe, the sharing of Venezuela's oil wealth to the Caribbean nations, Petrocaribe, in exchange, in very fair exchange, economic exchange for the resources to help out. And of course, that great Operation Miracle. How many of you have heard of Operation Miracle? Operación Milagros. This was Cuba and Venezuela in 2004. And I was there at the signing in 2004 in Havana, where Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez in the theater, the Karl Marx Theater, signed the agreement that started this great counter to the FTAA idea of the U.S. corporations, foreign corporations taking over the wealth of Latin America. Instead, Chavez and Fidel came up with the idea of the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance, the Bolivarian Alternative for the Americas at the time it was called, ALBA, against ALCA. And one of the projects was curing blindness and cataracts, vision problems. More than 2 million people in all of Latin America, and even in the US, have been flown into Cuba or into Venezuela to these clinics, beautiful clinics. I saw one in Venezuela. They stay for a week. they're diagnosed, a family member or a friend can come with them, and for free, their blindness, if it's caused by something that's curable, or their vision problems, are cured, treated for free. And that's what this new vision is. And this vision is and was for many of those countries. Unfortunately, some of those countries which joined ALBA, and please remember ALBA when I mention it later, some of those countries like Ecuador and Caribbean countries, Honduras, for example, in 2009, Honduras joined ALBA, and that was one of the main reasons why Mel Zelaya, the president, was overthrown that year. Because the U.S. could not stand to have one of its colonies, neo-colonies in Central America, join this great alternative to U.S. domination of Latin America. So that's just a little bit of the panorama of what Chavez's presidency and the Bolivarian Revolution, in alliance with Cuba, in alliance with Nicaragua, in alliance with Ecuador, before the president was changed, and Bolivia, and attempted in Honduras. This is trying to say that Latin America should be for Latin America, and the Caribbean as well. That the people should share the resources in solidarity and equality. What has happened since then? Well, I'll go back a little bit to history. In 2008, when President Barack Obama was running the first time, he gave what is a traditional Latin America speech. You know, the presidential candidates always speak about, different regions of the world and domestic policy. He went to Miami, May 23rd, 2008. You can look at his speech. And he basically gave a warning to Latin America. In 2008, Daniel Ortega had already been elected as a socialist in Nicaragua. Evo Morales had been elected. And Rafael Correa. We had Argentina and Brazil, progressive governments. And Obama said to a crowd of right-wing Cubans, he was surrounded by them, he said, George Bush, as president, ignored Latin America. And as a result of that ignoring it, Hugo Chavez filled the vacuum with his checkbook diplomacy. See, that's how they see it. That's how the oil companies and the U.S. government, on behalf of big oil and all the U.S. corporations and the Pentagon, that's how they see what Hugo Chavez was doing with the oil. Wasting it. They feel it should belong in their profits, in their super profits they used to make, instead of using it for the people, to cure blindness, to provide housing, to provide health care. And Obama said, we're not going to let that continue. He said he filled the vacuum with checkbook diplomacy. And he influenced Nicaragua and Bolivia. And then he said, and even Iran and China came into Latin America. And then he gave a warning about Cuba, that we're going to see democracy restored to Cuba. So this was a very, very telling speech that he gave. So I would say that the aggression, it didn't just begin with Trump. It increased with Obama. And as a matter of fact, it was in March 2015 that Obama made that outrageous declaration, the emergency measure, declaring that Venezuela was a national security risk to the United States. Completely bogus. But it allowed the U.S. to begin imposing sanctions on leaders, and later what we have seen lately, the theft of Venezuela's wealth, of the Citgo properties in the United States, the cutting off of Venezuela's attempt to find new markets for the oil so that it can provide for the people in the country which need food and housing and education. Because the people need resources. That's what's taking place, is the U.S. is trying to starve the Venezuelan people. And the U.S. is denying the medicine, directly denying the medicine. This is genocide. Nothing less than genocide, because people have already died as a result in these last 3 months. The other day, when I was in Venezuela, February 12 to March 12, I was watching TV, and President Maduro was on television making an announcement, a live announcement. And he said, because some of our markets are cut off by the U.S., and because our property has been seized in the U.S., we have agreements now. We're going to be selling oil to Asia. He said, in particular, India. He mentioned India as one country. Well, just a few days ago, Reliance Industries, one of the Indian oil corporations, made public the fact we're not going to have that deal. We're not going to buy oil or have an economic deal with Venezuela because the U.S. sanctions prohibit it. This is the long arm of U.S. imperialism, trying to strangle a country because that's what they're trying to do. They want to make the country scream, like Henry Kissinger said about Chile. Who knows what happened in Chile? Who knows what happened in 1973 in Chile? Very briefly, the U.S. corporations, international capital, the CIA, IT&T, the copper companies which used to dominate over Chile and extract all the copper and get all the super profits, they engaged in a 3-year war against the socialist elected president Salvador Allende. And the food disappeared from the shelves, and there was really, really an economic crisis that was artificially created. And then when the Moneda Palace was bombed and ushered in a fascist regime for at least 17 years, you never heard about the suffering after that. You only heard about the humanitarian crisis at the time. I don't know if they used that term at the time, but it's similar to what's taking place in Venezuela. The U.S. wants to make it scream. So I want to talk a little bit about what I saw in Venezuela. I said I've been there 12 times. This time, we decided to send me to report for Liberation News, our newspaper that you see at the front. Because the U.S. declared that they would support Juan Guaido, an unknown, and who is a fascist. Juan Guaido is part of Voluntad Popular Party. And if you read the article that we passed out to people, the article with the 2 pictures of Guaido and Roberto Marrero, no, it's a sheet. I don't know if you can tell the sheet.
Yeah, right
Oh,
here.
well, let's pass it out. We copied it for people to have it. Take it, you don't have to read it now, but read later. This is an article I just wrote because on March 21, a man named Roberto Marrero was arrested in Caracas. And of course the U.S. media and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and Marco Rubio, they all said Venezuela is going to pay for this. This is one more thing that Nicolas Maduro is going to pay for, arresting Marrero. What happened with Marrero's arrest? Roberto Marrero had assault weapons in his house, but more, and he had U.S. and Bolivares. He had U.S. and Venezuelan currency. But more than that, he had several cell phones in his possession that were supposed to be given to his team of plotters. And on those cell phones, which they showed on TV, and you can see on the internet, was a plan to have some 60 men, at least in that plan that we know of now, 60 men in 6 to 8 teams, armed with plenty of money to carry out terrorist attacks, assassination, and they had a list. They had a list of the people that they planned to kill, including Nicolas Maduro. Plans to continue the sabotage and destruction of the electrical system. Plans to attack the metro stations, which they have done before. This is terrorism. What is the purpose of this? You don't have the power to overthrow a government that way, but it's part of the tactic of the United States in these months. Because the U.S. cannot easily send troops in, as much as they would like to. Actually, not so much troops, because if troops die, then it would cause a lot of anti-war sentiment in the U.S. No, bombs. The U.S. would probably like to bomb like they bombed Libya and Syria and Iraq. And I've been to Iraq. And Yugoslavia. I was in Yugoslavia for 10 days during the bombing, the U.S. NATO bombing in 1999. I know what U.S. bombs do. But anyway, the U.S. tactic in this time is they can't send troops because it would start a firestorm in Latin America among the people. Like you can't overthrow directly with U.S. troops. What they want to do with the oil, with the electricity sabotage and the terrorism is to create strife, terror, and violence in the population among each other. The Chavista forces, the millions of people who support the Bolivarian Revolution, you see them. I've been in their marches. You see them everywhere. You see it on social media. We want peace. Venezuela wants peace. We want peace. And then there are those who say, we want troops, we want violence, and who carry out terrorist violence. This plot, luckily, was revealed. It hasn't been fully dismantled because 30 of those people out of the 60 happened to get into the country, and they're searching for them. There was one Colombian terrorist who has a gang that they've been looking for. They finally caught him as a part of this operation. But you know, it's really interesting. How do you pay for all this? How do these terrorists pay for this? Where did the money come from? Well, it came from an internal operation. It's not in my article. It came from an internal operation in Santo Domingo of someone from Rosneft Oil and a corrupt criminal Venezuelan who was siphoning the money away from the oil of PDVSA in Dominican Republic. And the plotters, both Guaido and Marrero, and the man who's been named by Juan Guaido in Washington, D.C. as the ambassador to the United States, his name is Carlos Vecchio. He's one of those people, and they're all from Voluntad Popular Party, from the Popular Will Party. And you'll see a little mention in this video that I have of Popular Will and what they do to people who don't agree with them. So anyway, this team was exposed. This is what Juan Guaido is doing. It's not just saying, I'm president. It's carrying out and plotting terror. He's not a president, and he has no legitimacy as someone who says he wants to lead the country. He wants to return Venezuela on behalf of the United States back to those who ruled before. He's a puppet. He's a puppet. Thankfully, this plot was uncovered. But it's very serious. This is what Venezuela's facing. So I was there on February 23rd as well, the day that the U.S. decided that they were going to bring humanitarian aid. And nobody in Venezuela who who knows what's really going on, nobody in Venezuela supported that. People, you see some people in my video, people said, we don't need that. It's desicado. It's dried up, what do you call it, dehydrated food? You don't want to eat that. And the U.S. said, we're going to bring 70 tons of aid. Well, in Venezuela, the government is providing, on a regular basis, food to 6 million Venezuelans. I saw those food distributions. We'll see it in a video. And as they said, one of the officials there in Táchira state, the state that borders the border with Colombia, where the U.S. was going to bring it in, one of the officials says, U.S. says 70 tons of aid. He said, we distribute 12,000 tons of food on a regular basis. So who's really helping the people with food? The 12,000 tons in Táchira or the 70 tons, which was a Trojan horse? It wasn't aid. And nobody can say with honesty that it was aid. The real purpose of that so-called humanitarian aid delivery, or attempted delivery, was to try to split the military, to break up the unity and see if they could bring over a large enough number of military men and women over to Guaido's side, actually the U.S. side, to have a cover for U.S. operation. What happened? Trump spoke just a few days before it to help this operation, to try to see if they could split the military. And for those of you who may have watched him on TV, this time in Miami, he was surrounded by Venezuelan right-wingers, people who support him, people who want troops. And in that speech, who saw his speech? Who heard of his speech? Anybody? Nobody knows what he said? Okay. Trump said, we're going to get rid of socialism in Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba. And we will never have socialism in the United States. That was for a fact, he said, we'll never have socialism. And I thought, well, that's interesting because there's more interest in socialism than ever in the United States. And we have testament of all the young people, for example, who've joined our party and many other socialist organizations. They're growing, and we're growing. Because people see, we live capitalism. We live in the most supposedly developed capitalist country, supposedly the best example of capitalism, and you have half the population poor. And you have people who die because they don't have medical aid. And you have people in trucks, in dumpsters looking for food. And you have tent cities in San Francisco where I live, and Los Angeles, thousands of people in the street, and New York City, and Seattle, everywhere. Tent cities, because people don't have homes, because they can't pay the landlord, because they can't buy one of these skyscraper homes that are cropping up all over the country. This is capitalism, and that's why socialism is more popular. So we have a message to Trump. You may run on an anti-socialist program, but we're going to fight for socialism.
That's right.
Until we succeed. Anyway, that was Trump's message. But he also said that thing about, he said to the military, you have one last chance, to the Venezuelan military. He said, come over to our side. You have one last chance, and if you don't, you will lose everything in your lives. Whoa. Boy, you had to be afraid of Trump. And what happened? 300,000 people, out of 300,000 soldiers, officers and GIs, 300,000 soldiers, National Guard, the Bolivarian National Guard, 300 went over to the other side. A number of them walked across the border into Colombia on February 23rd. Does anybody know what happened to those young men? I only saw men, I didn't see women. Anybody knows what happened to those maybe, probably almost 300 people, because there were a few officers that betrayed their country, but most of them were young soldados raso. Anybody know what happened? Yes.
I saw a video that they were just...
Talk loud.
I saw a video that they were saying that they were just pretty much abandoned, that they hadn't heard from Trump or anybody, basically.
Yeah, they were abandoned because they were treated like scabs that they are. They betrayed their country in the middle of a very intense situation where they could have opened things up to military action against their country. And they were spit out. Narco Rubio, and they were saying this, these young people, because they had a press conference at the border with Colombia. They're in Colombia now, and there was a fence, and the reporter was putting her mic through the fence, and they said, we've been ordered, we have 4 days to stay in the hotel, and then we have to leave. And they gave us a mattress, or maybe a cushion, colchon. They gave us a mattress, and they gave us 300,000 pesos, which won't last long, I tell you. And we're pleading with President Guaido to help us. He's not going to help you. He just used you. And Narco Rubio's not going to help you either. But Narco Rubio promised them $25,000 if they help the U.S. There's no money going to them. This is disgusting. This is using people. Using people. And it's tragic, but you know, they know what they were doing. They know what they were doing. So the military is unified behind the government and with the government. Because in Venezuela, ever since Chavez, is this phenomenon called the civic military union. It's fascinating. The housing, The soldiers helped build the homes. The soldiers helped in the agriculture. The people, hundreds of thousands, and the goal is 2 million women and men, young and old, to become militias as an adjunct to the military. It's really, really beautiful to watch people willing to give their lives to defend their country against the biggest empire that we have seen. And that's what it is, U.S. imperialism. So it was a failure. I was on the Tienditas Bridge, and the National Guard soldiers, young, 19, 20, 18, they were 200 meters on either side of us, and we were on the bridge going up to Colombia. There wasn't as much, there wasn't violence in our group. There were hundreds of young people who were there to make sure that the aid didn't get in, and there were soldiers at the border, and to just defend the country. But the terrorist groups, these gangs with Molotovs, were on either end, and they were throwing them at the soldiers. 4 of them got burned, 1 seriously in his face. And then in the other bridge, which had a lot more violence, it was 15 hours of pitched battle. And you saw a lot of this probably on video. That's where the 4 humanitarian aid trucks were, the tractor trailers. They were parked there at the Simón Bolívar Bridge. It's right in town. It's right there. And there were hundreds of people supporting Venezuela. These gangs were filling Molotov cocktails. I don't know if you know what a Molotov cocktail is, but it's a glass bottle with gasoline and a rag that's tightly put in there so that the fumes don't come out. But you light the end of it, and then when you throw the Molotov and the glass shatters, the flame catches with the gasoline and causes great destruction. And 2 of the tractor trailers burned to the cinders that day, burned to a crisp. What happened that day? CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox TV, the world, European press, Luis Almagro, the puppet of the Organization of American States, they howled for days and said, look at Nicolas Maduro, how evil he is, this dictator, that he denies his people food, and he burned the trucks himself. That was a lie. Who had Molotov cocktails? But in fact, it's very interesting. A few weeks ago on a Sunday, the Sunday paper, the New York Times came up with their investigation. And the investigation showed by video that the Colombian government refused to release, but somehow New York Times got a hold of it. And they showed that 13 minutes was sliced out of the video that showed one man throwing the Molotov into the truck, catching on fire, and the other one threw a Molotov, and the rag fell out with the flame and caught the other truck on fire. And so it finally came out. Maduro didn't do it. Why would he do it? Why would he do something deliberately like that? I mean, let's be logical. Why do something that would make you look worse when you are the target of the biggest imperial power in the world and their allies? Why would you do that? Like when the power went out, the right wing, in the neighborhood I was in, some people said, Maduro! And I was at the airport when the lights went down and people were screaming, Maduro! And I'm like, I was yelling, Maduro didn't do it! It's ridiculous. If you're logical, why would Maduro cut the power to his own people? Why? No, it's not logical, and he didn't do it. In fact, it was electromagnetic, it was cyber attack, and the last outage of the last week, it's still not completely restored. Sharpshooters fired into the El Guri hydroelectric plant transformers. They have the bullets. They caught fire, and luckily they were rescued, partly. But the soldiers are trying to protect the most powerful transmission line from being destroyed because there's been terrorism. On March 16th, I think the day before, around March 16th, when we were marching in Washington, the power was restored, but there was a bomb, an explosion in a transformer in eastern Caracas, which is where basically the middle class lives. So this terrorism is continuing. And in this last several days, which is still continuing, it's only partially restored. It's a very serious 5-6 days of blackout. In the beginning of it, on Monday, Juan Guaido, and it's on the internet, he's speaking to the National Assembly, the one that's been declared null and void, and he said the power will continue down until Maduro leaves. How does he know that? And you know what? It shows he wants it to happen. He wants it to happen. And Mike Pompeo in the first blackout said, no food, no water, no power, next, no Maduro. And then here is the government struggling to overcome this crisis. I was at the airport March 7th. I was flying out at 7 p.m. It was 5 o'clock when the lights went out in the country. And when I heard that it was the whole country down, I took a cab home, pitch black. You know, I don't know how many of you have ever been in pitch black where there really is no electricity on a dark night. And it's, yeah, I was there, where?
Bangkok.
Bangkok. Interesting. I was in the San Francisco earthquake. 3 days of no power. Pitch black. You run into people walking down the street. And I went home, and all that night, and I imagine many people in Venezuela were thinking, is there going to be war tonight? The power's out. Are paratroopers landing at the Miraflores Palace? Are they going to kill Maduro? Are they going to carry out terrorism? All night, I couldn't sleep all night at all. And when the power goes out in Venezuela, there's no water because the water pumps need electricity, and all the water needs pumps. So in our homes, how many were there during the blackout? Anybody here?
I was there.
Okay.
But can I say something?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're gonna have discussion. You will be able to say something. 22 hours of no power, and then 3 o'clock the next afternoon, it was back on. I did video of that time where I was showing it's normal. It was hard for people, but they're out in the street, seeing if they can buy food, but of course without the debit card, which most people buy with a debit card because bolívares are scarce now, they couldn't buy without electricity. Looking for water. By the third, fourth night, water was very scarce. It was very hard. But I'll tell you this, nobody was drinking sewage water. Some of the media was saying that. It's not true. But what the government is doing these days now is getting water trucks to deliver water. And yet, sisters and brothers, a country cannot continue providing water that way to 30 million people. This is why this is a terrorism. You need water, and you need electricity. Several people died in the hospitals from the power outage the first time. The government delivered generators to all the hospitals in that day, because I went to one of the hospitals, huge generator was brought in. And they said nobody died in that hospital, but other people died because they couldn't transfer it over quick enough. That's, again, a genocidal act by the U.S. The lack of medicine, last year, the U.S. it's documented that the U.S. blocked the banks, U.S. banks and pressured international banks from completing the transaction that Venezuela had paid for the medicine to be shipped into the country. So for example, last January 2018, the country paid for the vaccines for the children, all the children for the vaccination programs. I really hope everyone's listening to me about this. And they didn't get them for 5 months. Why? Because 2 times the money was refused by the banks at the order of the U.S. This was last year. This was before the inauguration. This was before the election of the re-election of Maduro. This has been going on for a long time. And finally, the Pan American Health Organization intervened and got the money from Venezuela and delivered the medicine. When I was in Venezuela, Qatar, you know, the Middle Eastern country, was shipping medicine that was paid for by Venezuela, but Spain blocked it on its way and sent it back. They're trying to kill people. The insulin for 60,000 diabetics of Venezuela was blocked last year by U.S. order. On and on and on. 5 medical shipments. That's why, when I was in Venezuela, Russia said, we will deliver the medicine. 300 tons. And then what happened after some of the medicine was delivered? I don't know the name of a warehouse right by the airport. Why no? It's the name. The white, yeah. The warehouses were firebombed. They were firebombed. It's like terrorism. They don't want the people to live. They want to overthrow the government. And if they overthrow Maduro, if they were to, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if they were to do that, it's not just going to be, we're going to bring in Juan Guaido. No, they're going to privatize the oil. No, U.S. oil companies will come in and restore their power again. And Guaido himself said, we're going to get rid of this housing mission. What is a housing mission? 2.6 million homes, modern homes, built for the Venezuelan people. Why does that make some of the rich mad? Why does it make them mad? Because a lot of people have become rich in the real estate industry, right? What if the U.S. government said, we're going to build 30 million homes, equivalent in the United States? What if we were going to build tens of millions of homes for the poor, for the working class, and you only have to pay for about a year before you're the owner? That's what it takes, about a year to buy a house in Venezuela in this program. What do you think it would do for the real estate magnates? Those who are raising these skyscrapers, $2 million a shot, right, for your home. They'd be out of business. And it's good, because housing should be for a home. A home should be a right. And that's how they see it in Venezuela, social investment. More than once, people said social investment. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to end because I just wanted to give you a few vignettes of what I had seen and what I have experienced in these years. But much of the opposition in Venezuela refuses to hear these facts. I mean, really, I've had many, many discussions with many people in the opposition. I've spoken to many people. I've spoken to people from all different political views, and they refuse to believe that Maduro didn't cause the outage, and that Maduro didn't burn the trucks, even after the news. They just refuse. And so there is a struggle. It's a class struggle in Venezuela, to be frank. There are those who want the power back. There are those who feel that they will lose if this revolution continues. No, nobody's going to lose. Everybody, if the U.S. kept its hands off Venezuela and all these other governments and stopped threatening them, lift the sanctions, let them be, let them trade their oil. There's major oil trade between the U.S. and Venezuela. If they were let be to develop their country, everybody could have a decent life in Venezuela. But some people think they don't like equality and they don't like social justice. But that was Hugo Chavez, and that's Nicolas Maduro. I said in the beginning that the difference between some of these Latin American countries which have turned to the right is that it was reversed by an election of a conservative. But what's unique about Venezuela in this whole panorama of what's happened in the last few years is that the revolutionary process continues with a new president. And whatever happens, it's going to continue because there's a people defending it. Thank you. So we'll watch a little video. Is that
Which one should we watch first?
We'll show the video, then we'll have commentary.
You want a great housing mission?
Okay. We're going to show the housing mission. And please pay attention to the mention of Guaido. But this is 2 places that I visited. It's very short. We're here in a huge housing project of the Misión Vivienda, which was started by Hugo Chavez and continued now by President Maduro. There are thousands of apartment buildings here, modern, beautiful, accessible to the people. And here is a tribute to Chavez. This is a fruit of Chinese-Venezuelan cooperation of the civilian-military union. In other words, the workers and the military helped build this magnificent city here of housing.
Yo soy cantautor venezolano. Gracias al gobierno revolucionario de Nicolás Maduro, que ha seguido el legado del comandante Chávez, tenemos nuestra vivienda. Prueba fehaciente de la unión cívico-militar.
¿Dónde vivía antes?
Antes viví en algunos lugares, siempre alquilado, arrimado, y donde vivía antes era una organización que es muy violenta. La mayoría de la gente ahí es de derecha violenta, bueno, del Partido Voluntad Popular, etc. Y nosotros tuvimos que irnos de ahí huyendo porque ya estaba en peligro nuestra vida. Porque el fascismo es así. El fascismo no entiende de ideas, el fascismo entiende de violencia. Por eso nosotros le decimos al fascismo, a la derecha internacional y al imperialismo norteamericano, Trump, mano fuera de Venezuela.
Por fin tenemos estabilidad y nunca hubiésemos podido tener un apartamento tan bonito, un lugar tan bonito como este, con esas características. Vivimos en un apartamento de 3 habitaciones, muy bonito, pero nunca hubiésemos podido tenerlo si no hubiese sido por la grandísima vivienda de Venezuela. Porque al precio que compramos aquí, jamás hubiésemos podido comprar un apartamento de esas características en el mercado que llaman capitalista, que es el mercado, las viviendas del mercado.
Esta infraestructura tiene aproximadamente 8 años que fue entregado a más de 400 familias que están aquí ubicadas en 6 torres. Sencillamente la Gran Misión Vivienda nace en noviembre del 2010 en La Pedrera, un sector de la parroquia Antímona donde llegó Chávez, que le solicitaba a la gente que bajen, que bajaran. Y ese día ordenó que naciera la Gran Misión Vivienda de Venezuela para todo el territorio nacional. Gracias a esa misión se han construido en Venezuela hasta la presente fecha 2.600.000 viviendas.
Tuvimos alrededor de un mes, creo, más o menos, por ahí de lluvia, que eso era día y noche, y como realmente mi ranchito estaba en la orilla de la quebrada, fue comiendo, fue bajando, y como nosotros pagamos rancho bajo. Y yo viví todo mi coroto y todo eso, pero le doy muchas gracias a mi presidente porque este departamento me lo dieron con todo equipado y todo, y eso yo lo agradezco.
Más del 73% del presupuesto de la nación es un presupuesto que está destinado al tema del aporte social. Nosotros lo vemos como una inversión social, no lo vemos como una dádiva al pueblo, no lo miramos como una obligación al gobierno, lo vemos como la inversión social que un gobierno de corte socialista, de corte progresista, puede llevar adelante en función de garantizar los mejores estadios de nuestra patria. Y es por eso que Chávez siempre lo decía: lo importante para nosotros en la construcción del socialismo bolivariano, en la construcción del socialismo del siglo XXI, es la felicidad de nuestro pueblo, como lo decía nuestro libertador Simón Bolívar.
Hace rato que está lloviendo fuera en Venezuela, y hace rato largo que comenzó la siembra nueva. Hace rato que está lloviendo fuera en Venezuela, y hace rato largo que comenzó la siembra nueva.
The second one is about the food program, the one I was talking about the clap of these large boxes that are delivered. No, not that one.
Okay. This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
About the clap, 6 million homes, families get the food. More than 6 million families receive large quantities of food on a subsidized basis every month.
Mientras en el mercado un kilo de pollo tiene el costo de 10.000 bolívares soberanos, en estos momentos la comuna está distribuyendo a más de 1.000 familias, está distribuyendo un combo de un pollo que oscila entre 2 y 3 kilos, carne y huevos por tan solo el costo de 1.000 bolívares soberanos. Es decir, que totalmente asequible los clans trabajando en el tema de la resistencia económica para lograr de que lleguen alimentos a bajo costo subsidiados totalmente por el Estado.
Se les está llenando lo que falta para que lo lleven bien. Ya le han llevado los pollos, los huevos y la carne, proteína para cada una de las comunidades. Así que la ayuda humanitaria que nos iba a mandar todo, que se la comen solito, porque nosotros no la necesitamos. El pueblo venezolano tiene su gobierno bolivariano, que es el que nos ampara a todos, hombres, mujeres y niños, y extranjeros y venezolanos, no nada más los venezolanos. Que viva Maduro y viva nuestro presidente Nicolás Maduro.
El Estado Mayor de los planes, que es el equipo de despliegue, todo lo que están allí. Y aquí vienen los planes.
Este jabón bolivariano comunitario. Esto es lo que le falta a los 500 bolívares. Y entre el otro le van de 2.000 y 3.000 bolívares. Bolivariano. Y lo producimos aquí en el kilo. Ese jabón se produce en kilo.
Ella es la camarada Reina Lina. Ella es la coordinadora por el Partido Socialista de Venezuela de comunas y consejos comunales de la parroquia. Aquí hay 21 comunas y
198 consejos comunales. Bueno, hola.
The neighborhoods are organized through communal councils, which in turn form larger entities called communes. The people with responsibilities are elected.
Esta es una de las misiones de nuestro comandante eterno Hugo Rafael Chávez Frías, que nos mandó como comunidad a organizarnos. Y bueno, en caso de eso, haciendo caso de eso, una de las parroquias emblemáticas es Catedral, donde nos hemos organizado y los resultados son estos, pues el beneficio, no como dicen que nos van a mandar una ayuda humanitaria donde es un desecho que nos iban a mandar, mientras que nosotros tenemos aquí la comida organizadamente. Eso.